We are currently facing an unprecedented situation with a president being impeached twice. One notable point made by this president is the idea that when civilizations begin to collapse, they become fixated on issues of gender. He suggests that this trend can be traced back to ancient civilizations like the Romans and Greeks, where the movement towards gender neutrality emerges in the late stages of culture decay. This phenomenon can be observed repeatedly throughout history. In a completely unprovoked act, Russian President Vladimir Putin initiated a devastating attack on Ukraine, resulting in a massive explosion in the heart of the country's second-largest city. The destruction in Karki, which is roughly equivalent to the size of Philadelphia, is overwhelming. Rebuilding Ukraine will require an estimated $325 million, and experts at BlackRock estimate that the total cost could range from $700 to $800 billion. As part of a new partnership, BlackRock will be advising the Ukrainian government on how to structure the country's reconstruction fund. This is a crisis on par with the situations we faced in Iraq and Afghanistan. Turning our attention to Capitol Hill, House Republicans have recently passed an emergency funding bill providing $14 billion in aid to Israel. However, this bill is facing opposition from the White House and Senate leaders who are advocating for an additional $1 billion in aid for Ukraine. It is concerning to see how desensitized we have become to all the news we consume, even when it involves such significant events. It is almost as if these events are becoming a mundane part of our everyday lives. During an interview, a question was raised regarding the conditions attached to America's support for Israel, considering the humanitarian crisis unfolding in Gaza. The response was quite clear, with the individual stating that America unequivocally stands behind Israel. When asked if America could have fought to support two foreign wars simultaneously, the answer was a resounding yes. Within the Biden administration, efforts are being made to address the influx of migrants at the border, which our reporters have recently witnessed firsthand. There is growing concern that the training being conducted in Afghanistan may inadvertently create opportunities for terrorist groups, such as Al-Qaeda, to infiltrate our southern borders. There have already been reports of small groups of terrorists procuring passports from the Afghan government with the sole intention of reaching the U.S. southern border. A notable issue we are facing domestically is a record increase in homelessness this year. Additionally, the Social Security reserve funds are projected to run out by 2034, and France has implemented a plan to raise their retirement age to 64 in an effort to sustain their pension system. This decision has sparked protests, as individuals feel they are being asked to work fewer years than their American counterparts. The only other feasible option seems to be printing more money, although this approach comes with its own set of risks. It is likely that politicians will resort to this solution as they refuse to acknowledge the underlying problems. However, this strategy could lead us down a path similar to that of Zimbabwe, with rampant inflation and economic instability. There are concerning signs indicating financial instability, such as skyrocketing auction prices for cars and a decreasing number of individuals able to afford them. This suggests that people are running out of money, and Americans are dipping into their savings to make ends meet. Despite these concerning indicators, there is still optimism in some circles about the future of the global economy. However, a striking 84% of CEOs predict an impending recession for the coming year. Our banking system is built on a precarious foundation, resembling a house of cards that could collapse at any moment. If such a collapse were to occur, the federal government would once again be compelled to sacrifice the average citizen's financial security to bail out the banking industry. This flawed system relies on this cycle of robbing the public to save the banks. Interestingly, a book written 30 years ago seemingly predicted the chaos we are currently experiencing. This book foresaw significant events like 9/11 and even the outbreak of COVID, highlighting the pervasive nature of human patterns and the cyclicality of history. Parallels to the wealth transfer observed during the COVID-19 pandemic are predicted to be repeated, with money once again being printed by the government, primarily benefiting the wealthy elite. A small portion of this money will reach the masses but eventually find its way back to the 1%. This ongoing trend, it is warned, will lead to increased hardship for the average person and their loved ones. The crisis is anticipated to have global repercussions, as interconnected economies around the world will suffer if the United States economy collapses. Preparations for these hardships are deemed crucial. Transitioning into a historical analysis, the GI generation, also known as the hero generation, which emerged after World War II, celebrated as heroes after enduring the Great Depression and the war, the GI generation ushered in a period of prosperity, unity, economic growth, political stability, and trust in the government. However, this era of prosperity did not last, and subsequent generations experienced different challenges. The silent generation, having been children during the war, was raised in a strict and overprotective environment. They later rebelled against the established order, leading to the emergence of cultural icons such as the Beatles and Andy Warhol. The baby boomers, raised by the hero generation, became a generation of entitlement and indulgence, rebelling against the order and marking a shift in societal values. As the hero GI generation aged and gained power, they sought benefits for themselves, leading to societal changes such as the weakening of the nuclear family and the narrowing of gender roles. The introduction of social programs by the GI generation became unsustainable as the subsequent rebellious hippie generation prioritized personal happiness over societal norms. The decision by President Nixon in 1971 to take the country off the gold standard allowed the money printer to generate more currency, leading to economic growth that disproportionately benefited the wealthy. Inflation soared, reaching 8.8% in 1973 and eventually rising to 12% by the end of the 1970s. Concurrently, the middle and lower classes experienced increasing debt. The children of the silent generation, raised in an environment of self-discovery, gave rise to the no-match generation, commonly known as Generation X. Focused on personal gain, this generation rejected societal causes, patriotism, and religion, worshiping themselves instead. The awakening during this period highlighted societal flaws, but resulted in a sense of disillusionment and gradual societal decay. Extreme polarization marked the era of culture wars, where Americans were divided into various niche groups. The selfishness and self-absorption of Generation X were evident, prioritizing personal gain over the greater good. The rise of Wall Street yuppies epitomized a culture of greed, extending to politicians who no longer feigned a sense of duty to serve the public. The economy suffered as the money printer continued to churn out currency, social programs became bloated, and the market experienced major crashes, culminating in the 2008 financial crisis and subsequent bailout of large banks. Inflation, euphemistically referred to as quantitative easing, has been a significant concern since 2008, when the United States entered a crisis known as the Fourth Turning. To combat the crisis, the Federal Reserve began printing money and purchasing government bonds. The effects of this approach are still being felt today, and there seems to be only one means of escape. The request is for Congress to increase the current $600 to $2,000 as part of President Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID relief package. The amount of money being printed is staggering. Starting with around $4 trillion US dollars, we now stand at $1.7 trillion, meaning that over 40% of all US dollars have been printed within the past year alone. However, this continuous printing is not without consequences. For example, Ukraine's military reports that all but one of their drones were intercepted and destroyed, leading to injuries, including an 11-year-old girl. The collapse of First Republic Bank is just one example of the ongoing financial turmoil. The anticipation of more banks failing is seemingly inevitable. Signature Bank and Silicon Valley Bank are two notable institutions facing uncertainty. Moreover, UBS, Switzerland's largest bank, has taken on the responsibility of acquiring its troubled rival, Credit Suisse. In the past, there have been predictions about an imminent market crash. However, despite concerns, the market has managed to evade collapse due to the intervention of central planners. Yet, now it appears that this delay tactic may be proving short-lived. Inflation, contrary to government reports, is actually much higher than anticipated. The Federal Reserve has recently halted money printing and implemented interest rate hikes to combat inflation. However, despite these measures, inflation continues unabated. This begs the question of why. To gain insights, Peter Schiff was consulted. He notes that the Federal Reserve aimed to reach a 2% inflation rate but repeatedly found it below their target. In response, they increased rates to achieve the desired result. However, this resulted in a lag effect, similar to adjusting the temperature of a shower. As one tries to reach the desired warmth, there is a delay before feeling the impact. In the case of the Federal Reserve, the lag has resulted in inflation rising to 10%, far beyond the intended target. Unfortunately, once the genie is out of the bottle, there is no easy way to control it. The inflationary effects of the trillions of dollars injected into the economy during the COVID pandemic are still working their way through various sectors. Alongside this, the increase in interest rates has made it difficult for people to afford essential items such as cars, homes, and loans. Interestingly, these rate hikes also have a lag effect. Historically, whenever the Federal Reserve has significantly raised rates, it has resulted in a recession. Looking at a graph, it becomes evident. The blue line represents interest rates, while the black bars illustrate periods when the rate hikes ceased. On average, it takes approximately 11 months after rate hikes stop for a recession to occur. Currently, the Federal Reserve has halted their interest rate hikes, hinting that a recession may be looming in about a year's time. These observations are not based on clairvoyance, but rather on the intentions of central planners. It seems as though a recession is precisely what they want. This inflation problem is not something that will manifest overnight. There is approximately a 12-month window before things start to deteriorate significantly, but signs of future problems are already visible. For instance, the Social Security Reserve funds are projected to run out by 2034, which means that individuals and their parents who had planned on relying on government support for retirement will likely face difficulties. It is evident that this situation is not sustainable, not just in the United States, but also globally. As seen in places like France, governments are struggling to afford support for their aging populations, resulting in decisions to raise the retirement age. Another pressing concern is national debt. Presently, the interest alone on the national debt surpasses $2 trillion, making it the largest expenditure for the government. In the near future, it is projected to consume half of the government's tax revenue. This means that not only will retirement funds be depleted, but the government will also be unable to afford welfare programs, food stamps, and even salaries. The only recourse for authorities would be to print more money, thus exacerbating the inflation problem. It is important to note that this isn't solely an issue for the United States. It is a global debt crisis. However, the ability to print money places the U.S. in a relatively more advantageous position compared to other countries. The current situation is the result of years of postponing and neglecting the underlying problems. It is similar to escaping smaller crises that could have acted as pressure valves, preventing a larger and more catastrophic event. Consequently, when the crisis finally hits, it will be severe. While there have been smaller crises along the way, they will pale in comparison to what is to come. Bailouts, which have been the go-to solution in the past, will no longer be viable as they would only exacerbate the inflation problem they are meant to solve. Adding to the complexity of these issues are the constant threats of global conflict, political uprisings, food and energy shortages, and social unrest. Nothing seems off the table, creating an even more volatile backdrop for the impending crisis. Although this may sound like fear-mongering, a closer examination reveals that all the signs indicate we are right on schedule for a major crisis. Unfortunately, when the crisis arrives, it will be the poor and the middle class who will suffer the most. Their remaining wealth will be transferred to the rich, similar to what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. However, there is an opportunity to prepare for these challenging times. There is a roughly 12-month period before the recession becomes dire, thanks to lag effects. However, relying on a typical 9-5 job that offers no security will not be enough to weather the storm. While 12 months may seem like ample time, it can quickly pass by, as evidenced by how swiftly this past year has flown. Most people delay taking action until the new year, but by February, they have already lost their momentum. Time gradually slips away, and with how rapidly the world is changing, it is uncertain what conditions will be like in just a few months. Therefore, immediate action is crucial for those who wish to prepare and ensure their ability to overcome the crisis. Rather than contemplating plans for the distant future, it is imperative to take action in the present moment, even within the next hour or day.